Hey, hey, welcome everybody to the Leader Tree where leadership grows, where strong roots build stronger skills, and where tonight we're talking about bendability. Bendability, what do I mean by that? Well, in leadership, you can do things two ways. You can be rigid or you can be bendable, right? Which one is best? Well, we're going to look at it and explore a couple different options here. And we're going to see whether or not you, as a leader, lean one way or the other. That's our goal for the night anyway. And I think it should be fun. So, bendability. As a leader, you are always being attacked with one problem or another that you've got to work with. And you've got to work with that and get things accomplished in spite of difficulties, which are trying to stand in your way of accomplishing whatever that task is or objective, right? So you can do it, you can approach it in two different manners. You can bulldoze your way through it and be very rigid, and you can say, okay, I'm in front of this brick wall. What can I do here? I can pound my way right through that wall until I crash through it. And then I win. I get to the goal, right? But the other way is to be bendable, to think outside the box a little bit, move around the wall maybe, and or go over the wall, right? Or dig under the wall. If a castle up on top of a high cliff or a big hill or something, a mountain, had huge walls that were impregnable, right? And try as they might, the invading armies couldn't get through those walls, right? The rigid leader kept trying to push through. The rigid leader kept saying, we got to take that wall out, The rigid leader kept saying, go, go, go. Putting wave after wave of men to their deaths. Fighting an uphill battle the whole way. The bendable leader takes a second and looks at the position from a different angle and says, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we just dig a giant hole underneath the wall and have it collapse, right? Down here at the bottom of the cliff, where we're out of the way from arrows and guns and bullets and cannons, we'll just sit here and dig out a big section, and when the ground settles, the wall collapses and we can walk right in and we win. That's the difference between being bendable and not being bendable, right? What is the secret to a really good sword? It's that flexibility, right? That bendability. Two ways of looking at sword making. Okay? In the original swords, they poured out metal and then they beat it into the shape they wanted and sharpened it, right? What happens when you take that sword into battle? It's very rigid. And you hit it just right, it'll snap in half. Right? Many a dead soldier had learned that lesson the hard way. Now the Japanese, on the other hand, they came up with an idea and they said, hey, let's do this. So they pour out a thin, wide sheet of metal. And they fold it over and they beat it nice and thin. Then they fold it again. And they beat it nice and thin. And they keep doing this over and over and over again. They just fold it and beat it thin. And fold it and beat it thin. And fold it and beat it thin. And what you end up with there is a sword that's full of flexibility. And it's not going to snap in battle. It's going to bend when it gets hit. It's going to move. It's going to shimmy. And it's going to stay strong. So there is a major correlation to how many times one can adjust one's position and how strong a leader that person becomes, just as there is with how many times you fold the metal in that sword to how flexible and strong it is overall. And this is a very interesting concept. And it brings me back to my favorite all-time quote, which was by Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was, at the time he said this, general. Of course, everybody knows he became president of the United States later on. But General Eisenhower said, "I have always found that in preparing for battle, plans are useless. But planning, that's indispensable." So here is a perfect example of a bendable leader. Okay? And this guy was strong. He was the most decorated general in history. Matter of fact, they were talking about having to promote Washington in order to keep up with him. Of course, Washington had been dead for a couple hundred years, right? But they didn't want Washington to be outranked by anyone else in the service. And Eisenhower, of course, did that, right? He outranked General Washington. So he won Second World War for us with his bendability, right? He looked at all sorts of scenarios and he said, we got to think outside the box a little bit. Here's an idea. Let's make a bunch of balloons that look like tanks and set them up over here. Let's throw some disinformation out there. Let's make people think we're going over here when we go over there. Let's work around the problem instead of trying to go through the brick wall. Even then we have an uphill battle, but we got a shot. And he was right. Not only was he right, but they fell for it. So, I imagine the world would be a different place had he been more rigid and said, we've got more men, let's just go at them. Might not have worked out as well. Maybe it would have. We'll never know because he didn't do that. But it might not have. We could all be speaking German today. Or Japanese. I mean, heck, the Japanese held Alaska for a little while there. They don't teach that in history books anymore. There's a lot of things in the history books that they don't teach us anymore. Things that were in the history books when I grew up are not in there now. And I imagine that we can all say that. There was a time they wanted to take the whole civil rights movement out of the history books. Well, it just never happened. No big deal. That little dust up, no. It's like, this is history, folks. These are major events in the world, not just in our individual lives. This is how we grow as a civilization. We learn from the mistakes of the past so that we don't repeat them, because we have them written down to tell us how it all worked out. When you start taking that away, that's when mistakes keep being redone over and over again. But I'm getting off on a tangent. Talking about bendability. So, here's a guy who says plans are useless when you're prepared for battle. But planning itself is indispensable. What is he saying to us here? He's saying that, look, he acknowledges that he doesn't know everything that's going to happen. And he's saying that he's acknowledging that things most likely will not go according to the plan. Right? Because there are a lot of cogs and a lot of wheels that are turning. Right? And on the other side, they could choose a myriad of different rules, or different, not rules, but responses to the moves that we're making. Right? And depending on the response that they go with, we need to be able to pivot and react and move forward. Right? So he says the plan itself is probably not going to work as it's planned. But planning being indispensable, I know that we've got to be ready for anything. We've got to know what to do in case. We've got to be ready. We've got to be willing to bend. Because planning is indispensable, even if it doesn't go according to the plan. This is why the man picked up a 5th star and became president later on. Talk about being able to bend. Something that is not in the history books either, but it is in his private memoir, which he later published before he died. Eisenhower admits that we could have beat the Russians into space by 6 months. And he made the judgment call not to do it. Against everybody telling him that we needed to beat Russia. Against everybody on his case about the fact that he wasn't launching. Von Braun himself screaming at him in the Oval Office. That dude had a lot of balls for an ex-Nazi, right? But the guy made all the rockets. And he wanted them to go into space. And he wanted to win. He was a type A personality, that Von Braun. And he's standing there in the Oval Office. He's screaming at the President of the United States of America. About how he had all these teams working. He had all these people working round the clock to get this done. To beat the Russians. Which is what he was tasked to do. And now the president isn't willing to launch. But this is what made Eisenhower so great. He was willing to take the flak from von Braun, from everybody. Literally everybody. From the entire country. From the press. The press corps was beating him up front every day. And he sitting there knowing in his head, all I gotta do is give the order and this crap is over. He's sticking to his guns though. He's saying, no. It's more important to know the truth of where we are versus the Russians. And he was bending to get that perspective. He wanted to know. Because even the Russians were saying, we're going to win, we're going to win, we're going to win. America sucks. Russia is where it's at. We're so far ahead of America. Yada, yada, yada. So we held back from launching in spite of a lot of pressure until after Russia did. And the reason he did it was just to find out how close they actually were to us. And it turns out they weren't that damn close at all because it still took them 6 months from the day we were ready to launch. And then what did they launch? Not much. It did not go well for them at all, actually. And then after that, we launched. But even afterwards, the world ridiculed him. The newspapers ridiculed him. Everybody was pissed off. America lost value in the eyes of the entire world because we allowed Russia to win. We're second rate. And he never spoke up about it. He just let it go. Taking it almost to the grave before he finally allowed it to be known. But he wrote about it, at least. He wrote his shit down. He wrote it down to let us all know what was going down, so that it would be recorded for history. He was willing to bend, and as a result, we had a better structure and a better understanding of our enemy. A more rigid leader would have launched, but we would have had less information about our enemy. Sun Tzu was also a very big proponent of being able to bend. He tell you to study the field. He would say, study your surroundings, study the field. Use what God gives you to your advantage. Do not fight in an open field. Bring them to a choke point where you, with a smaller number, can do more damage than your enemy with a larger number. And then you got a shot. Don't go toe-to-toe with them if they're bigger than you. Make them come to you. Robert E. Lee found out the hard way that bigger numbers don't necessarily mean a win. You got to have the higher ground and quit throwing man after man after man at them. Even so, Lee might have won if not for Stonewall Jackson dying. Stonewall Jackson buried in 2 separate graves. Look it up. You don't believe me. His right arm is buried, and then he was buried. Both of them had a full military funeral because General Lee said he was my right arm man. So we'll bury that arm with full honors. Stonewall Jackson was not that bendable of a leader. But you know what he was? He was tenacious. He's a smart guy. But his whole purpose was to keep his troops from breaking ranks. He said, guys, if we hold strong, no matter what's coming at us, we are feared. If we turn and break up, we are prey. And truth be told, Jackson's men were the most feared unit during the Civil War. Everybody that came up against them was afraid. He had a reputation of not losing. He was quick-witted and very, very, very courageous. Very dedicated to his job. He loved his troops, every one of them. It is said he knew every single soldier that served with him by first name. And their wives. He had a lot of soldiers that served under him. So, if that's true, that's a heck of an accomplishment, let me tell you. A heck of accomplishment. There has been a lot of turmoil in the world today. But no matter where we're at, no matter what we're doing, whether we're in the boardroom or on the street or in government, we don't accomplish anything as well as we can without learning to be bendable. President Trump is the first president ever to go to North Korea and sit down with them. First president ever to do that. You think he didn't go in there with a game plan? Of course he did. He went in there with a game plan and he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to accomplish these things here. So he goes in there. He plays hardball. Right? Plays hardball. And of course, what does North Korea do in response? They play hardball. Right? But this is all part of the plan. Because, as we know, planning itself is indispensable. So as he's doing this, and they're responding the way he thinks they're going to respond, then he softens up his tone a little bit. He bends with it and says, hey, what will it take? He gives them the opening. This is something that they didn't expect. So it catches them off guard, right? So they look around. Okay. And they start opening it up. Now you got a dialogue. Now you got a conversation. That's exactly how he wanted that one to play out. From there, once you got the conversation, then it's a matter of give and take. You can't go hardballing it with North Korea. Because, quite frankly, some of their ideas are a little crazy. Some of their leadership might be a little crazy. Some, at least that's, my personal opinion. But you got to go in with an idea in your head, but be willing to bend with it and adjust and make something. And he made headway, which is something nobody thought he would do. And if given enough opportunity, I really believe some amazing work could have come out of that. And the seeds are planted. And I just hope that our new president continues down the avenue to where we can make things eventually work out a little bit more peaceful with that country. Because I was a nuclear, biological, chemical warfare specialist in the Army. And anybody who knew me will tell you that if they ever said anything to me, I'd tell them, there's only one country I'm worried about, and that's North Korea. I'm not worried about Russia. I'm not worried about the Ukraine. I'm not worried about any of these little countries with nuclear weapons. I'm not worried about Iran. I'm worried about North Korea and North Korea only. They're the only ones crazy enough to find a way to kill the world. Right? President Trump knew that going in and wanted to find a way to solve it. And he chose to do that by being bendable in that negotiation, being open to flowing with it. And he amazingly enough accomplished what the world believed could not be done. He got somewhere with that crackpot who rules that country. Folks, in your life, you have to choose a path. You can bulldoze through it like a solid piece of steel. And that'll work most of the time. But eventually, you're going to hit that wall just right and break. Or you can bend and flow like water does, as Confucius would say. And you can topple an entire mountain range. Or create one. For the Leader Tree, I'm Chris Miller, reminding you to always keep smiling.